Why did people call this woman a witch when she was actually one of Poland's best-known forest scientists? She lived deep in an ancient forest with no electricity, no running water, and no modern comforts. A wild lynx slept in her bed. A crow stole from forest workers. A boar lived in her home for years. This is the true story of Simona Kossak and the strange life she built inside Europe's last primeval woodland. People repeated the animal stories like folklore, but her work was real, documented, and public, built slowly over decades, in the same cabin most outsiders thought no one could survive in. They called her a witch, not as a joke. People meant it. They said she lived alone in the woods. They said she talked to animals like they understood her. They said she had a crow that stole from people. They said a lynx slept beside her like a house cat. The hut had no electricity, no running water, no heat except a stove. To outsiders, it didn't look like someone living. It looked like someone disappearing. But Simona Kossak didn't disappear. So why would anyone choose that life? In the winter of 1971, Simona Kossak walked into Poland's Białowieża Forest at night. Snow covered the ground. The trees were tall and old. The forest was quiet but not empty. On her way to a lodge called Dziedzynka, she saw a European bison cross her path. It was massive. It moved slowly. Then it disappeared into the trees. Simona did not turn back. She kept going. When she reached the lodge, she found a place that was barely standing. The middle room had no floorboards. Fungus grew across the walls. There was no electricity, no running water, no proper heating. Most people would have looked once and walked away. Simona looked at it and said, "It's here or nowhere else." And she stayed. Why would a woman with options stay in a wreck like that? Simona wasn't poor, she wasn't lost, and she didn't end up there by accident. She came from one of Poland's most famous families. The Kossaks were celebrated painters. Their artwork hung in museums across Europe. For generations, the family name carried respect. Simona was expected to follow that path, but she didn't. She chose biology instead. And when she was offered a life inside the forest, she took it, not for a season, not to try it out, for real. So what do you do with a broken cabin in the woods? She repaired it herself. No electricity arrived later. No comfort upgrades. No modern rescue. She rebuilt Dziedzynka with her own hands. Inside, she filled it with things that looked strange together. Oil lamps, old porcelain, lace cloths, antique weapons, an oak bed inherited from her family, and in the center of the home, she placed a large table. That table became her lab. During the day, she observed animals in the forest. At night, she wrote her research by lamplight. This wasn't living off-grid. This was her work, and she was only just getting started. And then the quiet was interrupted. A photographer named Lech Wilczek arrived. He was sent by the park service to live in half the lodge. Simona didn't want him there. Not because she hated him, at first, but because she had chosen isolation for a reason. For the work, for the silence, for the forest itself. Now, she had to share her space. Accounts describe her as furious, But the turning point came fast. Lech brought home an orphaned wild boar. It was 1 day old. No mother, no chance of survival alone. Simona could have refused the burden. She didn't. They named the boar Żabka. It meant froggy. They raised her together, and slowly the cabin changed. The anger faded, the space softened, the days became shared. Lech stayed, Simona stayed, and Żabka stayed too. But how does a wild boar live inside a home for years? Żabka grew large, not small and manageable, not easy. She became a giant. And she didn't live outside. She lived with them for 17 years. And then came the animal that made her famous for the wrong reasons. His name was Kossak. Kossak was a crow, a large black forest crow with sharp eyes and absolutely no respect for personal space. He didn't just steal food. He stole wallets, permits, scissors, cigarette cases. He stole workers' paychecks. He ripped open bags. He shredded papers. He attacked cyclists from the air. Some people believed the crow was a punishment. One story spread through forest workers. A man was stopped for walking without a permit. A guard wrote a fine and handed over the paper. Kossak swooped down, grabbed it in his beak, flew to the roof of Dziedzynka and tore it apart. The guard watched, then shrugged, then walked away. Kossak became a legend. Not because he was cute, because he was impossible, and Simona never sent him away. When she rode her motorcycle, Kossak sat on her head. When Lech walked through town, the crow flew overhead and landed on his shoulder. People stared. Simona didn't explain. And then there was the one detail people couldn't stop repeating. A lynx cub. Her name was Agatka. Simona raised her from infancy. Agatka slept curled beside her in bed. Simona called her my daughter. Not as a joke, not for attention. When Agatka died, the cabin went quiet. Simona and Lech cancelled their Christmas plans that year. They didn't make a statement. They didn't turn it into a story. They just didn't celebrate. This was the cost of living that close. The animals weren't decorations. They were part of the home. And loss didn't stay outside. Did the animals truly accept her? Or was it something else? Simona didn't just rescue animals, she studied them. Their reactions, their signals, their fear. One day she tried to walk deeper into the woods. A group of deer stopped her. They barked and panicked. They refused to move aside. They blocked the path. Simona didn't force her way through. She turned back. No dramatic explanation. Just a choice made quietly, in the snow. So what was the truth behind the witch story? Simona Kossak was a scientist. She earned her PhD in 1980. She studied animal behavior, how mammals moved through their environment, how they lived, how they responded. She didn't treat animals like objects. She relied heavily on observation instead of harsh control. And she wasn't unknown in her field. Over the course of her career, she authored over 100 scientific works, along with popular books about the forest, written for people who didn't live anywhere near it. Her work continued to grow. She later earned a postdoctoral degree in 1991. She became a professor of forest sciences. and in 2003, she became director of the Department of Natural Forests. But she still lived at Dziedzynka, even when she didn't have to. And her work wasn't only academic. Simona helped create a device that warned wild animals when trains were coming. It was called the UOS 1 Repeller. It reduced animal deaths near railways. She also became a public voice for ecology. On Polish radio Białowieża, she hosted a well-known series with a title that roughly translates to "Why Does the Grass Rustle?", where she explained the forest through everyday observations and real science. She wrote books. She helped make films and programs. And for a lot of people, she made Białowieża feel real. Not like a myth, not like a postcard, like a place that could be damaged quietly, over time. But the forest didn't only need studying, it needed defending. Simona fought against trapping methods used on animals. When she found illegal steel traps set for wolves and lynx, she took them. And she refused to return them. She stood her ground. That decision brought her into court. She also spoke publicly against threats to the forest, including logging. Critics called her extreme. Officials tried to intimidate her. But she didn't soften. And the fights didn't stop quickly. They stretched across years. So what did she give up to live this way? Simona never had children. She came from a cold, formal family life, and she didn't build her home around tradition. She built something else. Żabka, Korasek, Agatka, and countless other animals she rescued, raised, and released. Every Christmas Eve, she and Lesh decorated a spruce tree outside with food for the animals. Berries, apples, dried fruit. Not for photographs, not for visitors, because that was their routine. And even a life like this does not last forever. Simona Kossak died on March 15, 2007. She was 63. Lech stayed at Dziedzynka after she died. He lived there until 2018. Dziedzynka is now protected. And her story has been retold through modern films, including Simona 2022 and Simona Kossak 2024, bringing her name back into public view. Her legacy also stayed closer to home. In the Podlaski region, schools and streets bear her name. But the cabin, the work, and the forest were always the center of it. So why did they call her a witch? Because that word fit the story people wanted to repeat. A woman in the woods, a lynx in her bed, a crow that stole from strangers, a boar that lived like a housemate. But the real story was simpler. Simona Kossak stayed in that forest to study it closely, and she spent decades pushing back against the things that threatened it. For over 30 years, she lived close enough to notice what others missed, and stubborn enough not to leave. She wasn't a witch. She lived at Dziedzynka, and the forest kept her name.